Hello and welcome back to Parley. These are my on-the-spot responses to the prompts you folks submit. Hope you'll enjoy listening. This one is from vampbug. It's about good scoring systems, or rating systems, if you like. You might be thinking, there's no way there's this amount of, however long this video is, amount of time, worth talking about that? On the contrary, vampbug begins, let's think about a good scoring system. I've recently made a Letterboxd account and started using it as a place to keep a list of movies I've watched. Cool. Alongside the button to say you've seen a given movie, there are two more buttons to rate it out of 10, technically out of 5 stars with half stars available. That could be useful. And a button to give the movie a like/a heart. That could be useful too. My scoring system currently involves assuming 2.5 stars is a truly average movie, mechanically competent and emotionally competent, but that giving a heart to a movie elevates it in my personal rankings by like 1 star. I don't know. Thoughts? I do have thoughts. You're right. And so this, what you're talking about here is kind of calibrating the scale. Like, what does 2.5 mean? Okay. Great. And then there's one more thing that we'll come back to later. Fantastic. First of all, lots of tools to work with. The 5 stars thing is probably for the aesthetic of movies or cinema, but a lot of stuff nowadays is rated out of 10. We'll certainly talk about that. Being able to rate it out of 5 stars instead, like just not using the half stars, may be relevant. And I'm actually also going to suggest rating things out of 4 and 2 as well, or considering doing so, though maybe not on this platform. I personally have a few different Google spreadsheets or, whatever Excel type thing to rate stuff in my life. I do it for video games and tea and anime currently. But they're just those things because I have that amount of an unmanageable variety of those things. And maybe we could talk about what you rate, but that seems a little less related, so we'll put it at the end. Yeah, so a big thing we'll talk about is number of rating out of, what do you score it out of? And why would that even matter? Why would you not just do 10? We'll get into that. I think there are some very good reasons. Calibrating the scale, that is, what does each ranking mean? A lot of people who might initially have reacted like, you just rate everything out of 10 and that's what it is, and a 7 is a 7 and we all know what that is. Like, okay, but if you've looked at any of the major, rating aggregating sites, I'm imagining my anime list, but I think an obvious example to give would be IGN for video games. So their scoring system is deeply broken and everything is just rated a 7, basically. Not everything, but like way too large of a group of things. And I can tell you, having played or watched many of those things, they are absolutely not even remotely a similar quality. And I don't even think that the people who rated them that number think that they are the same, quality or enjoyment to them or to the general public. It isn't helpful to rate those things all the same. And the scale does have 9 other numbers, so it's not good to rate things that way. I could explain why. Maybe we'll do that at the end too. Doesn't seem like the topic of this parlay. We're going to talk about a good way to rate things, not a way to fix people's bad way of rating things. So I'm not going to spend too much time trying to prove to you that the way people currently rate things is usually bad, but like it is though, and I feel like that's kind of readily apparent. I don't know. Tell me if you think you want a parlay about that. Great. Ask that for a parlay. Sure. But for now, there just blatantly isn't a bunch of different scores most of the time. And so, yeah, like that's not useful. So reducing the size of the scale has a number of impacts on that subject. We will go on to talk about some other stuff. I said we were going to talk about calibrating the scale and using a little tick box, favorite, heart, something like that. That's potentially useful. I think that's cool. Potentially rating things multiple times may be useful as well. So we'll get into that stuff. But let's start with where we are, which is the size of the scale, basically. I think we can agree that you probably benefit from using the whole scale. Some people might not agree with that, and I do think it's worth briefly unpacking that. If something is a 1 out of 10, some people might be thinking, well, if the movie is out of 10 and it's how good the movie is, every movie is just getting a movie to market is already a 1 out of 10, like just managing to get a movie published at all, or like, let's say you're writing a book, right? Your book makes it to publishing. You might argue that no matter how bad the book is, that's already a 1 or a 2 out of 10 worth of success or something. But for the premise of this parlay, I want to focus us on, but is it useful to rate things that way? Because if you rate things that way, every book you can buy in a bookstore would be a 1 or a 2 out of 10. Every single possible book would get that score, at least that score. Now, you could say that's the floor, okay, but why not a 0? It wasn't a coherent movie or book, or like it wasn't understandable. It wasn't written in a language consistently that is readable by humans. Like that would be a 0. It arguably isn't a book, basically, would be that. Or like the movie, the file is corrupted everywhere the movie's file is stored. You actually can't watch the movie without like significant futzing. Might not be a 0 to some people, but you see what I mean. It's arguably not even a movie. I don't think it's very helpful to rate things in a way where you don't use the parts of the scale. Because if you don't use the parts of the scale around the part of the scale you rate things a lot, you watch lots of good things, that's great. You rate a lot of things a 7 or like a 3.5, 4 out of 5 out of 10, great. That's what I'm going to try to get us all toward doing. Fantastic. But how much does that mean if there isn't any other perspective point? And I would argue if you explore a subject, you are finding your 5 out of 5s, your 3 out of 5s, and probably your 2 out of 5s a reasonable amount of the time. And I think most of us can imagine at least one thing in a media firm that we like, a format that we like is what I was trying to say, that is a 1 out of 5 or a 1 out of 10 or whatever. The Room for movies. I don't know. It would be an obvious thing to say. I'm not super into film, so that's just an example I would give you. So I'm going to take that as a premise for the rest of this parlay. You don't have to agree. I don't want you to agree necessarily. I just want everyone to think about it and have a better time. But I don't feel like it is that useful to have a lot of the scale that doesn't get used. Granted, I understand people don't want to be seeing a bunch of like 2 and 1 out of 10 movies or whatever. I'm not suggesting you do that, really. But you probably have some perspective point for that. And a 4 or a 3 out of 10? I feel like if you explore, you are going to encounter those decently often. Is that... no? Anyway, that's what I'm going to argue here. So let's actually jump to calibration a little bit, because that's where we are. So out of 10, if you're going to rate things out of 10, maybe there's kind of brackets. Like a 5 seems like a useful... it was average. So, and then a 6, it was better than average. A system I use that I find really helpful is to say that a 7 is a person with access to a good amount of media's minimum for it being worth your time. This was good for a person with standards, frankly. It is a 4 out of 10, a 4 out of 5. That's going to get very confusing, sorry. And therefore is worth my time. It is better than average enough that I will go seek it out. It is noteworthy, you might even say. An 8 out of 10, better than that, and then a 9 and a 10 out of 10, we're getting into the territory of, well, it's really good. That's truly exceptional. It goes beyond, in some significant way, that 7 out of 10 tier. What exactly that means, I feel, is a little outside the scope of this parlay, though we are going to talk about how, in general, you're thinking about rating things. Not just calibrating, but like, out of 10 of what, basically? How proficiently it was made, how much you liked it, how much impact it had on you. We'll get into that in a minute, but let's do this first. So you can probably see where 5 out of 10 would come from, right? I said 1 or 2 out of 10, 3 or 4 out of 10, 5 or 6 out of 10, 7 or 8 out of 10, 9 or 10 out of 10. That's 5 things, so why not just do 5? I don't think it's meaningless to do 10. I currently use 10 when my partner and I try things or watch a show or whatever. We often rate them out of 10 with each other to get an idea of how... well, the person said, oh, it was cool. Okay, how much did you like it, though? And I think that's helpful because we use the whole scale. Within the past week, my partner has said at least 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 to me. I'm not sure she's used the other ones, but okay, we didn't have a 9 or a 10 out of 10 in the past week. It was hot. Give me a break. It wasn't the best week. And then, yeah, like, no shit, in an average week, we didn't have a 3, a 2, a 1. I would hope most people don't out of 10. So, a 3 out of 10 might happen some weeks, some months, go figure. So, sure, we do use the whole scale, but going a step further, let me just interrogate my situation. Is it really worth having those scale points, even if we use them? A lot of people, probably I've already sold you because people don't even use most of the scale. And so certainly actually calibrating it so it means something is already a pretty big step up. But if we're just trying to get each other's preference, does it matter if the thing is a 7 or an 8 out of 10? It's 4 stars. It was worth our time. We liked it. It was good enough that we would seek more of that out. It's a food we got at the grocery store. We try it. 4 out of 10. We're going to buy more of it. 5 out of 10. That was amazing. Let's go get more right now. 3 out of 10. This is fine, but I just don't really care if we get more. 2 out of 10, and 1 out of 10, oh, no, that's terrible. Let's throw that out. Or try not to waste food and turn it into something else, but a lot of the time, it's a snack or whatever. This was already a waste of calories, and it's not tasty, so oh no. Try not to waste food, but you get my example. Don't torture yourself, and using the scale is a good way not to torture yourself. You don't want to waste food. Well, if it's a 2 out of 5, I mean, that's edible. It's fine, some bad food now and again. And having that part of the scale is useful. Again, probably most people don't need to seek out a perspective point here. And you can just think of something that's like, this would be a 1 out of 5 or a 2 or a 1 out of 10. But I'll stress that I don't think making, let's say it's beverages, like making sewage be a 1 out of 10 might not be meaningful because you already knew that wouldn't even be in the same ballpark as all this other stuff. I think it's useful for it to be, it's a drink that some people like, and that it was made to taste good, but you just think it is horrifically bad, even for something like that. I can imagine a beverage I've had that was like that lots of people enjoy, but I really don't. I fundamentally don't get it in a way that goes way beyond me just not liking it. It's kind of painful. I feel like I might die if I have enough of that. Like I'll just drop dead. So I don't know. I don't really understand. My eyes twitching out remembering this. It's Fernet Branca. It's an Italian Amari. Amaro is a category of Italian sweetened bitters. So it's like a liqueur, but it's bitter. That might sound bad. They can be really nice and balanced. A little Amaro Averna, might I recommend one. Amaro Montenegro, perhaps. Or Campari can be really interesting in like beer, for example. I prefer it in lager, but anyway, your mileage may vary. Fernet Branca is really bitter, and I don't think it's a very beautiful bitterness. I'm sorry, I know a lot of people like Fernet Branca, but I really despise it. And then it's really minty, and it's peppermint. It's like a really cold mint. Like spearmint might have helped there. We're not going to get into it that much. To me, if I lined up everything that I've ever drank that is trying to be tasty and some people like, I'm probably putting that at the back of the line. Like why? I just don't. Anyway, push down your feelings. It's going to be okay. It can't hurt you. I honestly feel like maybe it can still. So that's a 1 out of 10, okay? For me, that's a 1 out of 10. I really, truly hate that. And I like bitter things, too. Again, it's opened up where it's not like I don't even know how to like that whole category of things. You can't just rate every coffee a 1 out of 10 if you don't ever like any of them. I think that might be a time to just not rate coffee until you've found a way to, tuck in there and enjoy it. And so that's also a recommendation I would have. A lot of this has just been, how do you rate things, I guess? But I think a good scoring system reflects that. So perhaps 5 out of 10. It might be useful, especially if you're telling your preferences to other people, because a 3 out of 5, a 4 out of 5, a 5 out of 5 is fine. It's fine. I also want to say that the education system, at least the United States education system I grew up in, and it seems to be a problem elsewhere in the world too, is deeply broken and has taught people that a C is bad. It's not. You need to recalibrate your standards to be actually useful. A C is fine. Granted, I might not seek out something that's a C if the world has infinite, I can't finish them all in my lifetime, B's and A's. Fine. Okay. Maybe the college isn't going to pick your application if you're a C student versus a B student, but to act like B is bad or a C is bad and not merely average is unhelpful. Whether that's what people do or not, we're going to tackle it in the next section, but it's pretty objectively not helpful, in my opinion. So I don't know. That's my standard. Listen to me, or don't. So what's the deal with 4? And I said 2 before. Well, the point of 4 was introduced to me by iPatch Notes, a fellow Parley patron. Thank you for your support. iPatch Notes recommends 4 because you remove the middle option. So the goal of this is to make it so when people rate something, they don't say a neutral option that therefore makes the feedback irrelevant. For example, this comes up sometimes if I ask people to say how I'm doing or how a stream went or something like that. Out of 4 is very few decision points. That's useful. If out of 10 and out of 5 both work, then giving people less options is kind of good, right? It removes some analysis paralysis. And obviously 4, in theory does that. But the thing is that it removes them saying 3 out of 5 because they don't know. And if you put up surveys, like YouTube is a bit big with this now, you can put up a community post and you can give people options. It's very wise to include an option that is like, I don't know why I'm seeing this, or I just want to see the results or something like that, to remove people responding in a way that sounds like the middle of the road. They thought it was okay. But what they actually mean is they just don't care. They don't feel negative or positive, so they're not going to rate it a 3 or a 7. But they don't actually think it is neutral. They just don't care at all, and therefore a 5 is not very good data out of 10. And a 4 score rating system eliminates this. If you have only 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 4, then 3 out of 4 is good, 4 out of 4 is better, 2 out of 4 is bad, 1 out of 4 is worse. Done, And I do think for a lot of people this is useful. I want to say that I don't think it's useful to me, because the main benefit of this over 5 is getting people who don't think about rating things at all to be forced to express an opinion. But it is useful to rate things as something neutral in many cases. It is useful to genuinely express that your preference is in the middle, as long as you can assume the person is acting in good faith. And if you can't, why do you care about their rankings? Unless you're in a very specific position, like you run a YouTube channel and a Discord server and a Twitch channel, and you want to get people's feedback. For most humans, it simply isn't useful to listen to the ratings of people that you don't know how they've calibrated their scale, in my opinion. If you look at your IGN or your MyAnime list, well, those people don't have a single, at least, united calibration for how they rate things. They might argue they do, but they clearly do not, and they rate everything the same thing anyway. So it just isn't useful to listen to those ratings entirely. They're just wholesale. Those are just not entirely useless. And so there's really no point in forcing them to give a better rating unless we unite them all under the same system. Now, I do think the best you can do is out of 4, sure. You can let people say they liked something more than something, or they liked it, but they didn't like it as much as those other things, and they liked it less or not as little as some other things. If you have to make public people give you good information with a scoring system, I think 4 is a good way to do it. But for the way most people would meaningfully use a rating system, I don't think that you really want to eliminate that middle option. And naturally, you could just say 2. Did you like it or not? And I do think sometimes it's a keep it simple situation, and that could be useful. So I wanted to float it. I think that is useful and worth considering. Maybe you feel higher about it than I do. After all, if you're trying to remember how you felt and you didn't feel one way or another, maybe you feel like it isn't meaningful to include that 3 out of 5 or that 5 or 6 out of 10 option. But I do. I think that a lot of those things are useful. For example, it could be an ingredient, and it's sort of in the middle. It can be interesting from an analysis perspective to see, well, this game was a 5 or a 6 out of 10, but this mechanic is really interesting in here. And so because it is a frictionless experience, but just not that noteworthy, well, you can easily just get in there and see that mechanic. Maybe I'm going to pick that over something that's a 7 out of 10, but there isn't as much to see, or a 3 out of 10, but there is this interesting mechanic, if I'm recommending it to people that are intellectually interested, perhaps. I don't know. Stuff like that. I feel like I do currently somewhat use that neutral rating. But yes, I think it's a very good point that a lot of people use it as I just won't say which thing my opinion is. So if you're trying to get someone who you can't assume good faith or good reasoning from, maybe out of 4 is worth considering. I think that's smart and a useful tool. I just think it would be worth considering even further and saying, we're in the world of metacognition, thinking about thinking. Is it really worth knowing that person's opinion if you can't just get them to have a conversation about what they think about the subject? And I think often no, but sometimes yes. Obviously, if you go to a site like, I'm using my anime list as an example, and you make everybody rate things out of 4, you're going to end up with the distinction between shows, hundreds and thousands of shows, being like 2 decimal places, which maybe they think is silly, but I don't think it would be that silly. Things are over the mark or not in general. And for the general public, I mean, I think so many people are just rating things a 7 because they think, well, it's not a 5. I mean, that would be like an F in school, which is awful. That's not meaningful or useful at all, but I think that's what a lot of people think. And there's also a lot of people that think that other people rating this a 6 or whatever means if they rated a 4, even if they have a good reason to do so, other people are going to assault that because it's not that bad. Which brings us to our second major topic, which is why people rate things at all, basically. I think basically that a huge percentage of people rating things is problematically tied up in kind of a social signaling thing. They don't want to say that this thing is this bad the way other people think something is bad. A good amount of works that are a 2 out of 5 to me are not that bad. And other people just don't actually have a working rating system. And so they would think, well, that sounds awful. It's not awful. This is like a 3 or a 4 out of 5. Okay, I'm blessed with a lot more perspective than most people, and you are afraid of giving it a score lower than a 3 out of 5 because of a social perspective, a social pressure, or the pressure of how other people have rated it. Those aren't actually reasons about how good it is, so it's a 2 out of 5, I think, much of the time. And that's fine. It's fine for something to be like that. Many very skilled artists make things that are 2 out of 5s all the time. And what is the problem with that? Sometimes you might really enjoy those things. I feel we don't have to harp on this too much without at least getting into the more helpful part, which is why the rating is being done at all. I do think to have a good scoring system, you need to consider this. I don't think you can have a good scoring system without at least thinking about, is it what you liked versus how good it was? Let's first just talk about, for a lot of people, they feel like those are the same thing. Well, they liked it because it's objectively good. And I'm hoping that I'm talking to an audience mostly of people that are mature past the point where they don't understand the difference between those. No, your specific perspective is not the objective truth of the universe, but I don't feel like I'm going to belittle the audience here. I'm just going to assume you folks are past that point. Congratulations. At the maturity level of a young teen, or at least that's when people ought to figure this out, we understand the difference between, it had an impact on me versus it was technically proficient. Now, I want to interrogate the value of saying it was technically proficient, or it's objectively good, maybe. This is a thing that can be done meaningfully, in my opinion. I just think it often doesn't mean much. The movie or the show or the game has really good visuals or graphics. Okay, but in many cases, unless that's all it is, it just doesn't have a huge impact on how impactful the piece will actually be. Have you seen how many beautiful things are out there in the world? And as we've talked about before, for a lot of people, the explanation here is they haven't. No, they haven't. And so to them, if something is transcendently beautiful visually, and that's pretty much all it does well, that might feel like a 9 or a 10 out of 10. It won't once they've experienced a lot more media, but it will for now. And therefore, I think it's worth introducing a lot of other categories. I mean, a thought I have often is, I think Nier Automata is one of the most broadly proficiently made video games I've ever played. What I mean by this is that if you look at every single possible category you could imagine, or if you like, rated the work, technically, of every single person who worked on the game, the aggregate score of those people's work is ridiculously high. The soundtrack and the audio design, the Foley work, the sound effects, the way that the remixes of the audio track change context, and the same soundtrack has like 8 different versions, different motifs, different audio styles. Like there's this 8-bit version for when you're hacking, or 32-bit or whatever it is, a chiptune sounding version of the entire orchestra that you dynamically swap over to if you start hacking, and then it dynamically swaps back. That whole thing where you're syncing up gameplay with the music, the way the animations flow into each other. I think the build system is a little on the weak side, but the way that you flow between attacks is pretty interesting. The writing in the game has its moments anyway. The camera work is really interesting and really well framed. I think the smoothness of the movement is a really good choice for the game. and a variety of other things, the world building, the technical proficiency of how the game runs, the way the game has handled edge cases, and the variety of different ways the game can end. These are things I think people look over when they think about technical proficiency. They just say how good are the graphics, how smoothly does it run, and how fun was it. But that's not what technically proficient means. There's a lot of other stuff wrapped into there. And I don't think that all those things in Nier Automata are mostly like a 10 out of 10, but I think a shocking, staggering number of them are like an 8 or a 9 out of 10. They compete with the best things that exist in gaming, I think. And a truly absurd array of things in the game are that good from a technical perspective. Does that make the game good? Does that make the game fun? Not at all. Of course it doesn't. But it means if the game would have an impact on you, it's probably going to fire because it's doing the things that it would need to do to have that impact very, very well. Those things, I think, are the bedrock. They're the foundation of something being good and impactful to you. But they are not themselves the impact. I think for a lot of people where they get stuck here is that that was so much effort, that was so much work, that was so much technical proficiency that it seems almost, I'm going to use the word cruel to say then that the game is only a 3 out of 5 if all that work was put into it. But don't fetishize effort. It doesn't, can you eat it? Like, does it save the world for people to just put effort into something? No. And one of the places where I'd argue Nier Automata isn't as proficient, though it's certainly not bad, is its directorial oversight. That is, choosing where to direct all of this excellence. Because that is how that effort, which is worth nothing until harnessed, and is work smarter, not harder, will actually achieve something. And I think in many cases, yes, these parts of the game are very good. There's a lot of these parts of the game. But is that channeled? Is that funneled into very, very specific goals? Only at an above average level. Like, good, better than a lot of games, but not in an exceptional way, in my opinion, no. I don't think that the pacing of the game is truly exceptional. I don't think the structure of the game is as good as it easily could be. I don't think some of the dramatic timing or framing is as good as it easily could be. And I think that these are places where the game, yeah, you could say squanders some effort. It's not your fault if it does that. I think it's much more helpful then to say, well, did it impact you in this way? And then you can still recognize, for a person who it would impact, would it be likely to impact them? Yes. But did it impact you? Maybe not. And these are different things. And so I personally think it is very valuable indeed to try to rate these things differently, or mostly just to not rate how objectively or technically proficiently the thing was made. Unless you want to rate it for the general public. Vampbug has this additional part. Also, technically, on Letterboxd, you can leave 2 different public-facing scores on a movie. If you write a review, it can have a separate scoring and than what was displayed on your profile, but both are pretty easy to access for personal scorekeeping. Well, might I suggest that that public-facing score be the technical proficiency one, and you try to completely remove any perspective you have and simply say, like grading papers, this is how well it did these things. And the purpose of reviewing things that way is, if you are a person who, whatever the meaningful part of the work is, what will impact you, well, this is how little is in the way. A 10 out of 10 work in technical proficiency isn't good at all until humans watch it and enjoy it. But what it does do well is it is 10 out of 10 out of the way of you enjoying it. And this is very useful. It means that if it seems good to you, there is the highest possible chance that you will like it, I think. As long as they've done marketing would be in there, right? I think Nier Automata is probably like that too. If you think that you're going to like it, which I think a good number of people don't, but I think that means the marketing is somewhat well targeted. The way the game looks to people, I think, is maybe 8 out of 10 targeted. You're decently likely to guess correctly if you're going to like it. And that means that a lot of people will think they won't like it, and they probably won't. And that's good. That adds to the score, technically proficient. I think people have a real problem with that. Your preferences you don't need to like something to be a good person. It's okay. Not everything has to be for everyone at every time. And you know what? You probably will enjoy it at some time in your life. You want to wrap around to it. So I think that rating things if you want to, on a public facing scale, out of 10 or 5 or whatever for how out of the way of the audience not enjoying them they are. That is how proficiently they were made, how well they execute whatever it is they do. And then your rating is how well did they do the thing for you, is going to be very specific. I said at the beginning of the parlay that we're all on an inexorable path toward having our own specific preferences, wanting specific things from media we watch, having comparison points from things we played, and therefore this specific thing at this specific time just hit so good for me. And that's going to be less and less how technically proficient it was. You're going to orbit around things that are like 6 to 8 out of 10 technically proficient, and often not more than that, because they're not going to waste further time being absolutely flawless, and instead will focus on targeting, doing the thing they're trying to do well. And therefore, yeah, okay, it's true, you're probably going to end up exploring the technically solid things in the world, fine. If an artist is truly virtuosic and they do everything perfectly, I mean, are they going to be terrible at the basic technical execution? No. But are they going to fetishize making their prose and their work absolutely flawless? Probably no. That isn't the be-all end-all to a work, right? That's a kind of shallow way to argue that something just is good, and you can't take that away from me. But, like, who cares? How about it doing something in the real world for people? And so the very best writers are probably going to fall below a 10 out of 10 technically proficient-wise, because they like actually publish things and get the job done. Personally, a favorite writer of mine absolutely does not have 10 out of 10 prose, and that's not valuable to have. It wouldn't be good for him to have spent the time doing that. I don't think, anyway. And to be blunt, I think that people that do think that's important don't actually care about enjoying the work. They care about looking like someone who enjoys good things. And I think it's worth getting over that. I think life is a lot better if you just, who cares? I don't know. And that's not actually the impact it's having on you. What is the point of rating these things? Again, I'm not sure I think the technically proficient rating thing is actually useful, but if you want to do 2 ratings, and it might help you to think about those things as being different, maybe that would be useful. I think the main thing is rating the impact it had on you and why. It lets you track where these things are coming from. It lets you begin somewhat steering. Like someone in a canoe with a strong current, you can't perfectly direct where you flow down the rivers of life, but you can still kind of use your paddle to smack the side of the wall of the river or the riverbed. You can push off the bottom or paddle faster or try to slow down or move this way or that way at a fork. And you can do this more if you understand what things are having an impact on you. And you can do that by rating things based on the impact they had on you. Once you pair apart the technical proficiency aspect, once you have a rating system that allows you to actually represent those things, once you assume that it's better to rate things in a way that's actually useful rather than the way the general public rates them. But we did all that. Just the 30 minutes, we're practically starving for time in this parlay. We got plenty more to go. Not a huge amount more. So yeah, I think that the crux of the issue is basically avoiding rating things because of how it will look to other people. Or if you want to, you could do that too, but just separate it out somehow. And yeah, I mean, you could be a reviewer if you are a professional reviewer, which I like 25% am. It's a small part of my job. I think it's useful to find a way to represent this. So for example, in my games list currently, I give things an F, a D, a C, a B, or an A. And I have 2 columns. One of them is the build system, the focus of my career, the part of the game design that is you making builds in the game only. And then I have another column that I just call overall feels right now. And this is meant to be, well, how I feel about this game. It's not a secret. The reason I do that column is mostly just so people notice that build system D doesn't mean the game is bad, because you can't trust the general public to not think that, to not overlook that. And by giving a separate rating, even if it isn't that meaningful to me, and I go off of vibes pretty much, I really don't find those ratings that helpful for me, but I just go ahead and do it. It often pairs apart, For example, a helpful thing about doing that for me genuinely has been not the specific ratings, but that nearly every game's build system is weaker than I think the rest of the game is. But there are a few rare examples where the build system is, I think, very clearly much stronger than the rest of the game. But that's very uncommon. Almost always, a game with a build system, the build system is the weakest part of the game, or one of the weakest parts of the game. So, or everything about the game is really good, but then if I were to nitpick, I would say, okay, this is an A and an A, but the build system is the weaker of those things. The rest of the game is even better than that, I would say. I think Hades, for me, Hades, was an A and an A. I don't think everything about it is flawless. I think the story is one of the weaker parts, but some of the moment-to-moment writing can be okay. And I would say that even though it's an A for the build system, and I would give a lot of other parts of the game an A, the build system is the weakest part. I previously used Nier Automata as an example. A game I said technical-wise, technically proficient-wise, would be very high, scoring an 8 or a 9 out of 10 overall, but the build system is by far the weakest of those parts. That would be something I would rate as low as maybe a 6. But it has good ideas. And this is where I'm going to suggest the little checkbox thing. So, vampbug, you mentioned that you can give things like a like or a heart, and that adds in your personal rankings like 1 star or whatever. Now that we've booted into, okay, well, you're rating its impact on you, how it changed you or how you liked it, rather than like technical proficiency or whatever, you can do both. Now I think that heart or like, I was trying to do something like this too, so I was so glad to see that you brought this up. I was writing, with anime reviews, does this have a spark of creativity? Does this feel like the people who made it like actually care about it, irrespective of how well they did at executing that? And I'm not sure that's actually meaningful. I was just experimenting. But I really like this idea. And the reason I like it is to represent when something would be something you want to like, maybe. That could be a good check mark. You wanted to like it, but you just didn't. And you think it's technically proficient, but you just didn't enjoy it. Pairing that apart could be useful. There could be patterns with what you, over time, you see what are you saying you want to like, but then you didn't. And then also potential is a really big one. Nier Automata's build system is a good idea. It just isn't a good execution of that idea. You can remove parts of the UI and the HUD and stuff to gain yourself a little more build space. That's awesome. That's cool. When you upgrade a chip that you put into your RAM or whatever on your Android more, it takes up more and more space and it costs more and more resources, kind of exponentially, but it doesn't give more and more benefit a lot of the time. If that were regularized, that's a good idea too. It encourages the player to mix a variety of different effects. That's usually going to be more effective anyway, but then the game is actually about that. It means that if you make a build, it's kind of auto-balancing. If you make a build that it really runs away with the game, if you have a lot of damage, you've automatically made it inherently a little bit difficult to heavily stack a stat. And so if you can trivialize a mechanic in the game without the developer even knowing, you've made it automatically kind of hard to get that to fit, which is probably good because it means there's an actual trade-off to breaking the whole fucking game. So that's cool. And obviously removing all of your HUD is, well, that's just interesting. And you die if you remove the last piece. You just instantly blow up because you destroyed yourself, right? You can't remove the central processor unit on your computer. That's not going to help you make room. The computer won't work, right? So if you remove more stuff, eventually it just breaks you. And I think this is a really cool way to show the player that different amounts of space are debatable. If you feel like you can play without a health bar, I mean, what does that do really? But it might tell you when to heal, but you can have things auto-trigger when you heal as well. So maybe you can live without that, but it might be stressful. And so do you want that build space that much? What do you get for that space? It really makes the player think about that. The game doesn't do any of this well at all in practice, in my opinion. It might have for some people. I've played a lot of games that do something similar, but execute it better, in my opinion. I just think this was a really elegant framing of a way to do that. But that has so much potential. Like, I can't wait to play a game that does that well, to be blunt. I want to represent that somehow. And so maybe I would give the game a little check that just says potential man, and then leave it at that and say, okay, but like the build system was a C, but potential checkbox rather than saying it was a B. I just don't think it was for most people in the grand scheme of things. Not for most people. I don't care about that. That doesn't matter. In the grand scheme of things, it is not a B, but there's something really good there, and I might want to remember that too. Maybe you want to develop games or make movies at some point. You could remember, like, oh, those are the ones to look at. Those are the things that would be good. They're good ideas, but they haven't been done well yet, and so go to those. I don't want you to make games that copy or take inspiration from the A build systems necessarily. I hope you will play those if you're going to make a game with a build system. Most problems in the gaming industry are people not having gamer homework cred. They don't play the games that have already done well, the thing they then run into the same problems with and do poorly. But the real places to take inspiration are those like C and D games that have the potential checkbox. Hell yeah. Those are useful, I think. So yeah, I think that can be really good. Ambition might be another one. If it's like a movie or especially something you don't plan to make yourself, maybe that this was at least refreshing or a change of pace, or it moved the medium forward, but you actually don't think it did it that well in this particular case, might be useful. And a common example is I don't really like the Beatles. I don't think their music is really even noteworthy given what we have in the modern day, but it is arguably because of some of their music that it doesn't feel noteworthy to me. And I acknowledge that. And so if I wanted to acknowledge that in some way, I might say, oh, maybe a C. It's not some atrocity. It's fine. I just find it boring. Maybe I could represent that by saying an ambition checkbox, or like this moved the medium forward somehow. And that could be helpful to remember. I do find myself coming back to some of these artists. Led Zeppelin comes to mind, an artist I don't like that much in the grand scheme of things, but which I do think about more than some other artists. And I think most people process this as meaning the artist is truly great. I completely disagree. I think that is fetishizing effort. It feels like you have to respect that they did this thing, but you don't. That doesn't mean you have to completely disregard it either. You can just record that in some way and say that is valuable for what it is, but that's not the same as, it's kind of like technical proficiency, and it's not the same as me just enjoying it. You do not have to just say that you think something is good just because it is arguably impactful. You're not forced to do that. Your preferences matter more. It's you. It's your life. You don't have to live with that being important to you. And if you do like it, that's great. It's not like bad if you like Led Zeppelin or whatever. I kind of do. I don't know. But it doesn't have anything to do with that. I just want people to pair apart their preferences. I don't want any excuses that get you out of saying how you felt about it. And I do think a lot of people just don't know. And so when something comes back up in their mind or comes up in conversation a lot, they feel the need to say, well, that's really good then. That must be what that means. Look harder. You will find your preference in it. And maybe it is that, but I think a lot of the time it's not. And this is a great system to do that. May I just say, I am overjoyed to hear other people talking about this. This is the kind of parlay that I feel like, I don't know, I guess when I started making parlay and over the years, this is the type of thing I would think that people would ask about a lot. Because if you have a Q&A format that's really long, I mean, you have the time to talk about things like metacognition, like you're thinking about your thinking, which is very difficult to discuss in passing. You often have to unpack a lot of baggage, or like, why is this so broken in the world around us? And then what would be a better way to do it? But then how do you adapt that to we have to live in the real world? You often kind of don't, by the way. Like, you don't have to rate things with other people or care about other people's ratings. Just do them yourself or do them with your friends. My tea rating list, I have invited my partner and also my very close friend, my tea comrade, who I drink tea with. She and I just send each other and drink a lot of tea, to that spreadsheet as well. And we all have a slot for our own scores. And then I usually fill in the technical information, or if my tea friend got it, then she fills it in. And that's really helpful. It's a lot of fun. It lets us see with some automatic color grading. So I have the spreadsheet set up in this simple way where if you write like a 5 or a 6 or a 7 out of 10, that gets increasingly more positive color hue, and a 3 to 1 out of 10, it gets increasingly negative. So you can just see at a glance by color, oh, we all really liked this tea, or like you two liked this tea, but I didn't. And look, there's a bunch of those. What's going on there? You both like this thing, I don't, that is this flavor quality. And yet you don't agree about this flavor quality. That's interesting, and you can see it at a glance just visually. For very little effort, they literally just have to punch in a rating out of 10, or maybe I'll do it out of 5 now. But you can see how the hue may be useful. You know, now the nuance between a 9 and a 10, a 7 and an 8 might be useful. If one of us is saying, oh, we both thought it was really good, but I said a 7, you said an 8, maybe we even consistently say 7 and 8 respectively. Could that mean we both underuse that other part of the scale, and then we can get better at rating things in general? And suddenly this is a feedback loop where your entire life improves from writing one number in 3 seconds on your phone when you have a delicious cup of tea. And personally, I feel this is, when you get to that point, it's like, why would anyone not do this? But the reason is that this has taken 45 minutes, which I don't think is that. You could just listen to it while you're in the car or something. So I don't think that's a big deal. It took me a lot of work to set up, but now please, I bequeath that all onto you. Please steal it and use it for yourself and disagree with me and do it some different way, whatever. That doesn't matter at all. I don't think I have the best way to do it. I just have a much better way to do it, because that's really easy. The bar is very, 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 very low. And I am thrilled to hear other people going, yeah, we should probably improve that somehow. Yeah, I agree. Yep. And thankfully, it's very easy to do that. Virtually anything you do will be better than how it is. What I would like to end on is that the maxim often goes that a lot of people assume that things are as good as they can be already. On the contrary, not only is the world often just the way it is by happenstance, we do not live in the best of all possible worlds. Most of the time, we live in the worst of all possible worlds. Things are as bad as they could be and still function. We're at, you might even say, the 1 out of 10 perspective of the scale. In the rating system of rating systems, the only thing you need to keep in mind is that what we already have in the outside world is a 1 out of 10. So whatever you make, go nuts. No matter how bad it is, it's going to be better than that, because you will have thought of it yourself. Glorious. I feel maybe some pride is that arrogant of me, that you folks are asking about these things. It makes me feel great to get to talk about this and to see people showing interest in that. I was very snarky in this one, because I think that rating systems are very bad, and that it's a very big problem, because a lot of societal issues ultimately stem from people not thinking about their preferences, or thinking about their preferences, or they think it's bad to think of their preferences any more than this other way. I think it might seem like that's sort of a frivolous pastime for people that have way too much time on their hands. But in fact, no, I think a lot of really bad life decisions come from people not having a way to engage with how to make that decision better. And that's understandable. But there are time-efficient, effective ways to do that. And this is one of them, in my opinion. If I could make everybody on Earth do something, but with no magical ability to give them more time, it would probably be this. So I'm thrilled and obviously somewhat emotionally charged about the subject. And there's more to talk about. As I was saying before, we could get into more in depth. Why are people rating things the way that they are, and investigating, like, how is it really that bad? Go on my anime list and look through a bunch of ratings and explain to me why you think it's that bad, Zandy. I'm not convinced. I could do that, sure. Something like that. We could even get more into, how do you actually use these on the ground? You have this series of ratings. I do. So show us, and then explain how you would actually use it to find more things you'd like. I could easily do that. And I don't think a lot of other people can easily do that. So great. Yeah, that's cool. Am I just trying to get people to use their parlay on things I want to talk about more? I'll never tell. I get to do that. It's my show too, right? Good parlay. Thank you for asking it. Folks, if you'd like your own parlay like this one, you can get that using a link in the description. And I know some of you just pay me there to support the show. So thank you very much for your support. See you in the next one.